This is a quick disclaimer that this episode comes in 2 parts. This is part 2, but part 1 is available to listen to right now.
Casey, I'm not pleased that I'm pleased that that's what you get from the book, because I literally felt like my mind was being ripped to shreds. And you know what? I think it was. I couldn't,
It's
I couldn't piece things together, you know?
you said that you talk about cult dark and cult light, or dark cult and light cult, but even though there's a big segment on Keith Raniere and DOS and Nexium and the inner circle of Nexium and the sex trafficking and the hideous crimes that were committed by Keith Raniere and others complicit in the systematic sexual abuse of women within Nexium. You talk about, you said how those are the things that happened in Nexium, but you were never subjected or witnessed any of those same things. But I feel like awful things still happened. Sharon still did some awfully unethical, inhumane things in separating families and orchestrating relationships and breaking up marriages and just ruining people's lives, all to get herself more money. But if leadership in your group had wanted to succeed in the same things that Keith Raniere had done, the tactics were exactly the same. So they could have still achieved what was happening at Nexium or something similar to that. It just because that didn't happen in your group, it doesn't mean that it was any less severe or worse or less worse in the manipulation and the coercion, because the tactics were exactly the same and the outcome and could have been the same if those were the aims of leadership within school.
Yeah. And, I think it's a really good point, because after I left and I was obsessively researching cults and talking to other ex-members, I did have a conversation with someone who had been in iteration number 1. She had been through a lot of abuse, including being sexually abused by Alex. He had targeted particularly vulnerable women back in the 60s, 70s.
Sorry,
right?
this is Alex Horne, the original founder of school.
Yeah.
Okay, because we talked about a stage writer or script writer founding the group, but we didn't name him earlier. So Alex Horne, husband of Sharon, who became the matriarch of school.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and she said to me, these things are probably still happening. And I was like, they could have been, It just so happened that I was in Boston and I had a particular experience. I don't know what goes on in the inner circles. They didn't move me up the ranks, I think honestly, again, that there were some people that were really obviously all in, and that wasn't me,
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know how bad it got. I have no idea, but I do know that psychologically I was destroyed. Not destroyed totally, but I couldn't function.
And even if you were to become privy or to witness that those things were happening, who's to say what your reaction would have been because of the psychological condition that you found yourself in at that time?
Right. Yeah.
When I spoke with Nicola Ranson about her experience following Bhagwan Shree Rajneesh, when the allegations first came forward about what had been happening on the ranch in Oregon, first of all, she dismissed it and said it was fallacy, of course, because how could that ever happen in their perfect community?
Right.
But secondly, it's that she struggled for so long afterwards to accept what had happened when the evidence came forward, and had that whole readjustment period. And when I spoke to Mary Mahoney about her experiences in the Children of God, she said she never firsthand witnessed or experienced the child abuse that happened within the group. But who's to say what would have happened to her if she did witness it? Because she was much like somebody you spoke to in one of the religious groups that you spoke about, you might be able to tell me.
Carrie?
I don't know if it was the International Church of Christ. I think it was the Community of
Community of
Jesus.
Jesus. Yeah. Yeah.
So in the Community of Jesus, that spoke to me about having similarities to Mary's situation, because she was in Japan, she didn't speak the language, she didn't have a passport, she didn't have any money, she had 7 children, she had no way of getting out of the country, she wouldn't even know how to communicate for help.
Wow.
They lived with addresses that had PO boxes. Nobody had any personal mobile phones, nobody had any personal items, because everything was communal within the group. So she had nothing of monetary value. Basically human trafficking, essentially human trafficking.
Yeah.
For various reasons, labor trafficking, sex trafficking. And what would she have done if she did witness that? Where could she have turned to? What in that insular community, completely cut off from everything, even the culture that she grew up with and the language that she grew up with? What could she have done in that environment? So it's hard to say what people would have done, even if they did know of sexual abuse going on in school, or they did witness sexual abuse
Right.
going on in school.
Right.
And then you sit down to watch documentaries like Seduced, and you think, how did India Oxenberg become involved with Keith Raniere in the first place? And it's only when you look at the psychology and the methodologies that are used that you can say, oh my goodness, absolutely, that could have been anybody.
Yeah.
And that is something else that your book does as well. You've talked about Scientology, Nexium, you even mentioned The Handmaid's Tale, Transcendental Meditation, the International Church of Christ, Jehovah's Witnesses, One Taste, the Unification Church, Jonestown, Manson. You do speak about Wild Wild Country and Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh. You reference all of these different movements and how absolutely every single one of them share earmarks of the same principles that Hassan talks about on his bite model, and you sat down with Stephen Hassan and he said, stop calling it school, call it a cult.
Yeah.
But immediately you're labeling it for what it is. It is a cult.
The cult. I love that little snippet, that, and I can't remember. I spoke to him once on the phone, and I met with him once in person, because he's actually based in Boston, in the Boston area. And I can't remember exactly when he said that to me, but it was such a shift. This is not a school. It's a cult.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Use accurate language,
You talk about the Seduced documentary, you talk about Robert J. Lifton's work, obviously pioneer and grandfather to cultic studies. You talk about Cults in Our Midst by Yanya Lalich and Margaret Singer. You talk about Yanya's other work. You talk about so many different experts in the field, and you apply their research to other groups and survivors of other groups that you've interviewed that then are similar to your experiences. And so what we get there is an aerial view of all these systematic approaches in place that allow for this manipulation and coercion to happen, to the point where you are on psychological brink of breakdown and you are so abused in your independence, in your free thinking, in your relationship with your husband, your violated around your decision making and unable to make any decisions for yourself. And it's again it's heartbreaking to read that part of the story, but what is so much harder to comprehend is that is not a unique experience for anybody. It's actually probably one of the more common traits of cult survivors.
I would say across the board. Like that's the only way to stay in a group like that. Because if you had your wits together and somebody started being mean to you, you'd be like, I'm out of here, right? But in this case, it's all the gaslighting and self-doubt and insecurity. What am I going to do without the ultimate irony is that you don't need the group needs you.
At one point, you do become a recruiter yourself. You have your own voicemail that you pay for.
Mm-hmm.
You did talk about briefly in your book how you have spent time since trying um to to save the people that you did successfully recruit into the movement.
This is such, I mean, I actually love this chapter because I was very unsuccessful as a recruiter. I didn't want to make new friends. I hated the process. It was so against my, it was a piece of me that I really retained. Like, this was a value of mine. I'm like, I don't believe in proselytizing. I don't believe in trying to convince somebody into a group, you know? So that's where that cognitive dissonance was screaming in my head. All right. Part of me was like, this is batshit, it's wrong, and you don't believe in it. And the other part of me was, I have to do this. It is my third line of work. I'm going to lose everything I've worked so hard for. If I don't do this, what if this person in front of me in line at Starbucks is, they have the solution for climate change. If I can just get them to school with the right help, just constant back and forth. And Casey, that pressure followed me around all day long. Couldn't pick up prescriptions at the CVS without feeling like, should I be talking to this person? Maybe they have a magnetic center and they're looking for the right help, And this is what was ripping my brain apart. But I did have a friend who went with me to a presentation, and this is a very common cult tactic for recruitment. School would put on these presentations, and the presentations were like, you invite a certain amount of people. And it was always this batshit thing of like, we haven't set a date and we don't know where we're going to have it and we don't know what the topic is. But could you invite some friends to this thing that you've heard about that seems to be really interesting, and I'll let you know when it's going to happen. Okay.
Again, it's like I go to this place that doesn't have a name and I do this thing that doesn't have a name, and all of us meet in this building that doesn't have a name.
Same thing. So I did invite a couple of friends. My friend John actually ended up in school for a couple of years, and then after I left, and I first of all realized I had no idea what I was in, and then I started learning more and more. Like, I was learning about New York, and then I was learning about the arranged marriages, and then I was learning about the weird, like, let's split up families and hand babies over to other couples and pretend like, then this mother has to pretend like, that's not their kid, because the other couple is raising the baby. Just so heinous. When I started learning about it, I was despondent. I was like, oh, what have I gotten? Because he's a good friend, and his wife is a very dear friend of mine. And so I was obsessed with getting him out. And I started to notice that even though I was, what is called a disgruntled ex-student, you can't leave these groups. Once you leave, you're like the Antichrist, right?
I have this written here. You talked about Jehovah's Witnesses using bad association and Scientology using suppressive person.
Yes, and school uses disgruntled ex-student. We're all disgruntled. As you can see. So anyway, I started to call him, and he was picking up the phone. He was talking to me. He was talking to me about school. And these are all things that he was breaking rules to do. So I thought, there's a crack in the armor here, And I kept at him throughout. This was like fall through the winter of, oh, God, I don't remember which year. I left in 2011. It was probably 2012, 2013. I'm not sure, but after the holiday season was over, I finally got together with him to have coffee, and I was like, I didn't know how he was going to respond, right? This is all about timing. And I was like, John, I have to tell you what I've learned about this group. Well, first of all, let me just back up a little bit. We're sitting in a coffee shop. I've known this guy for years, and he's looking around because he's not supposed to be sitting there with me, right? And I said, John, we've been friends for years. And I can tell right now you're really uncomfortable sitting here with me. I said, don't you think that's kind of fucked up? And he was like, yeah, you're right. And then I started telling him what Chris had learned and then what I had learned. And he was like, why didn't you tell me earlier? And I was like, John, I'm sorry. I just didn't know how you would respond. I didn't know if you'd push me away, you know? And he said, well, I'm not leaving by myself. So he orchestrated this whole thing. I mean, it's a great, I had like really wanted to, include it in the book. It was just, there's already too much material in there. Yeah, he orchestrated this whole escape plan. And I mean, it was, I called him 007. Like he got it, he started using his voicemail to send messages to his his co-students, and he handed flyers to them, and he sprung
Oh
like
my
about
goodness,
half a book.
it's like Prison Break.
It was like Prison Break, and I remember like him calling me the night that it happened, and like 2 a.m, me on the cell phone going, "What's going on, John?"
That's incredible. Oh my goodness, I want to speak to John.
Well, I will ask him. Actually, I'm gonna see him tonight. I will ask him.
Oh my goodness,
Yeah.
tell John that I just think that that's the best thing that I've heard in such a long time. Well, I'm not leaving on my own.
Oh my God! You know what? And we still laugh about it to this day because, to think that that's what it took to get a bunch of people to leave.
Yeah.
Like, and to think like these teachers were treating this podunk mom and pop allegedly esoteric school like the FBI. That he had to like jump through all those hoops. But about maybe half of the one class he was in left. So good on him.
I was about to say he like almost carried out a mutiny where he got the whole group to just
almost
a mutiny. So there was a lot of stuff that was on my question list that I wanted to talk about. I think me and Spencer spoke about this a little bit about so Alex Horne, he founded the group with his wife Sharon. They had scandals, they were in the newspapers, so they moved from San Francisco over to New York. They opened that branch under a new name that doesn't actually have a name, but sometimes does, but then it changes again. And then there was a new branch that opened where you are in Boston, and it's kind of different but also very similar. And so Alex Horne dies and Sharon takes over the group. Sharon is, as I think Spencer described her, as like a C-list acting celebrity. She's been in a few films, and then he went on to say that she was a very unattractive woman, but objectively only to him, that's how he would describe her. But then in your book, you said that she was a short, round figure who kind of bopped into the class when you first met her. So we're going to talk about Sharon in a minute. But so Sharon Gans, cult leader, Gans, that is. So Sharon Gans, she started this group with her husband. And by the time that we're talking about her in this story, she is a lot older than the films that she featured in that might have given her some notoriety a few decades before. But she did encourage husbands and wives to break up. She did encourage people to leave partners and spouses that weren't members of the group, and then to get married or into relationships with people that were members of school. And as you've mentioned, Esther, she did actually orchestrate family separations in order for other non-parents to have babies in their lives that were not theirs. So not entirely legal arrangements that we know of. And that kind of made me think of the Unification Church and how that happened as well with some families and a few people that we've spoken to on the show. I remember speaking to Teddy about his family and how he does have another sibling that never grew up with him, and then we talked a lot about the psychological effects that may have actually had on a person, even if they weren't willing to really feel or understand what they were experiencing from that separation from their newborn. And at the time I had that interview with Teddy, I think I was like heavily pregnant.
Oh, geez.
So some of the conversations that we've had around children has been difficult because my baby at the moment is 8 months old. So I can't even, the thought of me even today at the coffee shop, it was hard for me to spend the day working and to not come home and just be with her because she's so tiny. And she just is so happy when she sees me. It's the most beautiful reaction. So to do what she did to those families is just
evil.
I can't comprehend it. And I say that a lot. Like I say a lot, I can't imagine, but that's because I genuinely can't. I can't imagine somebody coming into my life and saying, your daughter is now going to go and live with that family and you have to pretend that you don't know who she is.
Yeah.
I can't imagine that. So that's why I say I cannot imagine how that would feel. And so you're recruiting at this time. You're very heavily involved. Your commitments are ever growing in the group. We've talked a little bit about the parties. So each year, the sustainers or people higher up in the group, who were basically just your keepers, were you would throw a party for them. And in the first year, you were thinking, oh, wow, that's a lovely idea. And then by the next year, you were thinking, oh, it happens every year. And actually, it seems fun at the time, but then you realize that it serves another purpose, which is actually just for you to spend all of your time party planning and going out to buy things and making things and cooking things and tasting certain dishes. And you have to do this and you have to do this. And then it translates over to holiday periods. So you're now recruiting, and now Christmases and Thanksgiving and all of this stuff is around the group. And then in walks Sharon.
All right.
So okay. you have Robert as the kind of leadership of or leader of your specific group, and to your knowledge, there's no one that is kind of giving him instructions or giving him orders or telling him how to lead the group. There's no separate corporate headquarters that you're aware of, but all of a sudden everybody's acting really strange. Everybody's a bit fidgety and on edge. And then in walks this really eccentric looking woman, and you don't know who she is, and you don't realize her significance to school at that time. So just talk us through everything, Sharon.
Okay. So, yes, go to class, notice people are acting really strange, a lot of scurrying around, a lot of whispering. I'm like, something feels weird. And, we get ready to start the class, which means teachers up front, students at their seats, quietly waiting. And suddenly Robert bursts through the door with this short, round, redheaded lady on his arm. He's like beaming at her. He's looking at, it was so weird for me because I was like, I've never seen Robert act like this. He's looking at her like, I adore you. And she like had what I remember is a lot of makeup and flowy scarves, and she's kind of she's kind of a large woman, and round, and he's escorting her to the front of the room, and he kind of deposits her in this chair, like this cushy chair that had been dragged to the front of the room. And I was fairly new. I mean, maybe a few months in, 3 months, 4 months into being in school. And he turned around and he swept his arm like a ringmaster, like that. And he goes, ask your questions. So I was like, okay, who is this person?
So that's kind of like a miscommunication on his part, because he understands her significance, but nobody else does. So he's like, introducing, ...
Yeah, and I mean, other people in the room did understand her significance because they were older students. So I don't actually didn't know who knew who she was and who didn't. Like, it was never clear, but people who did understand her significance would stood up and waited for her to call on them and asked, for help, or told her about their aim. And I was like, honestly, I was completely befuddled. I was like, first of all, why are we asking her questions? And secondly, her responses sounded like complete word salad to me. I was like, who is this mental patient? I mean, I know that's not the PC thing to say, but that is honestly what was going through my mind, and everyone was doing it with such reverence. And then comes the yoga moment, where this woman gets up to talk about something, and she talks about doing yoga, and there's this back and forth with her and Sharon, and so the student says, I've been practicing yoga, blah, blah, blah. Sharon says something like, yes, I practice yoga too, which was a little hard to believe, but okay. And then student says something about hearing angels. And I don't know, it just seemed like she was kind of vying for, to impress Sharon or get some kudos or affirmation from her. And Sharon said, what do you mean you hear angels? And student starts to stumble, and she said, Sharon says, I've been doing this work for 40 years. I have never heard angels. Why are you lying? And she just went after her. And again, I was fairly new. The Boston branch was not as brutal, in my opinion, from what I've heard, as the New York branch, and then, after kind of a tirade ripping into this woman, she says, why don't you just leave? And, this woman picked up her stuff, did the walk of shame, and went out the front, went out the door. And then another student, I don't remember if I say this in the book, but another student got up and said, I'm leaving too.
Yeah, you do. And this was something that I had in my notes, was this moment where Sharon attacks Linda is the name of the participant in the book.
Yeah.
Of course, that might not be her name in real life, but
yeah.
But there's this moment where you have one of those inner battles at this exact moment, which is something I mentioned earlier on that we would speak to a bit more, where you almost feel like you have these thoughts and feelings, but you can't convey them openly, and you can't speak to what you actually think or feel, or you're not sure what you think or feel at this moment, because you know that there's something extremely uncomfortable and wrong about what's happened, but also, like, then you're scared that if you say anything, the reaction will be the same for you, and so you want to avoid that humiliation, that public shame. You don't want to be targeted in a negative way by anybody, no matter who they are within the group, and whether you're aware of her place within the hierarchy or not. It's a moment in the book that kind of seals for the reader the magnitude of what you will endure, despite what you're thinking and what you won't say outwardly. And there are so many times where that happens, but this point in the book specifically was one that almost after it had passed set the standard for what you would then go on to witness and not say anything about.
Right.
Almost normalizing the bullying nature of what happened in that interaction.
It's a really good point, and I hadn't thought about it that way, but you know what? The bullying that ensued from the Boston branch teachers didn't meet that level, but it still was bullying, but it wasn't.
Yeah, I actually have a quote here that says, from your book, that says, Robert was calling my husband a bully while bullying me. and this was too funny to ignore.
Yep.
So when you went to Robert and said, I'm having marital problems, and he would say, you need to divorce your husband, your reaction is, hang on, he's telling me that my husband's a bully, but he's bullying me into believing that my husband's a bully.
Yes, and let me clarify that this is at the very end. This is when I'm out the door at this point. I don't think I could have had that insight until I decided I really got to get the hell out of this.
It was just quite funny that you mentioned that the Boston leadership were still using bullying tactics, and I had a quote already written down about that exact thing. But something that did happen in that interaction with Sharon and Linda is that you referred to the group then kind of because of the standards that were set. It's almost like it was almost like playground tactics with the ringleader of the group setting the standards for what was acceptable and what participants should endure.
Mm-hmm.
And then again, I kind of went back to a quote in my head from Mary's book Abnormal Normal, where she talks about how the children of God kept everybody so childlike, in such a childlike state, that the infantilization that happened meant that people couldn't learn how to become proper adults, couldn't learn how to become working members of society outside of the group, didn't know how to do that without the permission or direction of leadership. It kept them in such a childlike state that there was no independent thought, there was no independent decision making. It's like me looking after my 2-year-old now, and making those decisions for him on what he will have for dinner and how he will cross the road and what he will wear that day. And that link between the two groups, and again, that just goes hand in hand with all other high demand groups and cults, was so significant. And I've already mentioned your Community of Jesus quote from the survivor that you interviewed, who talked about how they preached total death to self, and how that meant no individualism whatsoever, and how if you wanted to go on to higher education, well, why would you want to do that? What purpose does that serve other than yourself? So that came to mind as well. But the biggest link that I made between what you wrote in your memoir and what people have come to speak about on the show was the mystical manipulation that happened from your sustainers. And this is obviously all coming from Sharon and the leadership and the processes that are taught, whether it's on paper or through workshops or on the telephone or from person to person, or passed down from older members to newer members, however it happens in school, or however it's happened in the New York branch to the Boston branch, or however it still happens today. There is a group that has been explored on the podcast. It's a high demand religious group. It's a new religious movement. It's called Shinchunji. And what they do is they send out recruiters to go out to college campuses, to go out to places where I say in air quotes, young impressionable people may be residing, people in transitional periods. Students are absolutely ripe for this type of approach, because they are usually away from home, away from familiar daily structures, familiar family members and friends, and everything that they know and love around them, especially if they've gone to a university that's not in their home state or not in their hometown or city. And these recruiters say, hey, do you read the Bible? And it's just that simple question. Do you read the Bible? And could you imagine if you were approached by somebody in the Bible Belt of America and asked if you read the Bible? If
Right.
you're in and someone comes up to you and says, hey, do you read the Bible? And I think it's something like 70% of Americans class themselves as Christian, or some wild statistic that is way over 50%. So that simple line then leads to, hey, do you want to come to the coffee shop and read the Bible with me? We can look at verses. So it turns into one-on-one Bible study, which is casual. And then from that, they go to a Bible class with a few other people. They're all new. They're the same as you, as a new member of school. They're kind of being told the same thing. After they've been to several months of one-on-one Bible sessions and then several months of new Bible study classes, they are then invited into the next stage, much like you were with school, where they do levels, and there's graduation, which is a huge event that is built up for weeks and weeks and weeks. And there are mandatory sessions. It goes from 1 meeting a week to 2 meetings a week for 5 hours each, to 3 meetings a week for 6 hours each, and so on and so on and so on. And then when these people graduate, they then find out that actually what they are studying is the teachings of Shincheonji, which is the one true religion and the only religion that is correct in its teachings. And this is the correct interpretation of the Bible. And this is what Shincheonji believes. And they do have a leader who is revered, almost like a cult of personality. So then it becomes less about the religion and more about the leader and the leadership and the leader's family and the origin of the religion. And then the people that were in the original study group, the other new members, turn out to be existing members who have been a part of Shincheonji for months or years and have pretended to be new members, so that if you tell them that you have any thoughts or doubts that aren't in keeping with the group, that they can then say, oh, but do you not feel that way? Because that's not how I feel. And then the conformity comes in. So you're thinking, oh, if everybody else in my group thinks that this is right, then I must be the only one that's wrong. Or from that, they are sharing notes with other people in leadership about things that you're saying and things that you're reporting. And then you find out that leadership and teachers are actually in WhatsApp groups that have your name at the top, where they are collating information on you and they are feeding it back to each other. So when you talked in your book about the mystical manipulation of the sustainers who come out with these thoughts and feelings that are exactly in keeping with your thoughts and feelings at that time, and you're like, oh my goodness, how did they know that? It's because people like Lisa have gone back to them with the file that they are keeping and saying, Esther is struggling with keeping a job at the moment, or Esther is struggling in this particular employment, or Esther's just had a bad breakup. So then the sustainer, or somebody like Robert in a position of leadership, comes to you and says, Esther, there are things in life that are difficult, like maintaining a job, or being happy in your employment, or finding love. And I can help you with all of those things. And he comes to you and he hits the nail on the head with every single problem that you have in your life. And you're like, oh my goodness, wow.
Yeah.
How does he know? He must really be enlightened. He must really have the answers to everything. And I can be just like him if I do the work, if I stay, if I carry on, if I commit more and more and more and more. So I was so shocked when I was reading your book and the links to Shincheonji that came through and the methodologies that were used. And I was just thinking, and when they reveal all of those tactics to the members of Shincheonji, they say, we were doing it for you. Yes. We were doing it because if we told you everything at the start, we'd be giving away too much and it wouldn't have had the same effect for you. It wouldn't have been so positive for you. So all of these things that we have done, information control and manipulation, it's all for your benefit.
For you. It's all to make you a more enlightened person. Just, I mean, it's the same basically with what happened with when I started being trained to recruit, because what they were teaching me was what I had experienced. you know.
And
I'm
how
like,
did that feel to be able to pinpoint exact moments with Lisa and be like, oh my goodness?
you know what? I was furious at her. And that was a real problem inside of me. I mean, you know what? The inner skeptics were like, fuck her, you know? And then the inner starry eyed believers would say, yeah, but if Lisa had told me in the beginning, I wouldn't have, and then I would never have met Chris, and I wouldn't have this, and like that was another battle, But I was like, she fucking played me. I mean, let's say the part of me that I would say was really me, not the cult self, was like she played me. This
And
woman.
how did your interactions with her change from then on? Did you just carry on as normal, or did you look at her
Honestly,
differently and think,
I
what?
didn't, I didn't see her that much. You know. Well, that's not actually true. I'm sorry. Let me think about this. I don't think they changed that much because the interactions with her were so controlled. I would only see her at recruitment meetings. Like she was kind of training us to recruit.
Oh gosh, okay.
Yeah. So that's the only time I was always in the group. At that time, I think, when I was with the other people, the skeptics were on silence. But then I would leave and I'd be furious because I'd go, that's what she did to me.
That's so strange to think about, because every single person in that recruitment meeting could have been recruited by her. So she could be looking around at every single one of you and thinking,
Very possibly.
and you.
Yeah.
I recruited all of you. And I wonder if that makes her feel uncomfortable or proud. And then from that, as you said, the moment that you had some distance and some space, you were like, hang on a minute, I'm not happy about what's happened here.
Yeah, that's part of the reason why I just felt so ripped apart psychologically, right? Because part of me was justifying it, and feeling like I had to do the same thing for someone else, right? And part of me was like, if she had told me, fill in the blank, if she had told me in the beginning, by the way, 2.5 years in, we're going to expect you to go out and recruit people in the beginning, I would have said, no thanks. I'm not doing that.
Especially when a lot of the sunk cost fallacy, or a lot of the guilt and shame that causes people to stay in these groups, comes from the fact that a lot of the people now involved in the group are people that they themselves have brought in.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness,
Yeah.
what a whirlwind.
It was, yeah, crazy. And I think she was a very successful recruiter for a while. So I think, to some extent she's getting some, status in the group from, just being good at bringing people in.
I guess we should mention that the whole point of school really was to feed Sharon's
Yes.
financial needs,
Her
or
financial,
financial habits.
yeah. Yeah, her $8 million condo in the Park Plaza Hotel in New York City, her red bathtub that she bought. I don't know. These are stories I've heard,
So the
her.
$350 a month tuition was all kind of really going into Sharon's pocket, as far as we can tell.
As far as I know, I think Robert must have gotten paid. I can't
And
imagine he was just doing this out of the, generosity of his heart. But I don't
Sharon
know.
did pass away recently, I believe.
Yeah, it was was it March last year? I think it was March last year.
Yeah, that would make sense, because I think I remember Spencer saying that she passed away from COVID, and she was in her 70s. So
Probably 80s.
it's
I can't
strange
remember.
that Lisa is still recruiting so hardcore now that the mother of the group.
Well, it's a little hard to say, although I have gotten some correspondence through my blog that someone's out recruiting because, a few people have found the blog and been like, "Oh my god, thank God I didn't sign on to."
Yes. Oh, Esther, that's amazing.
Yeah. So it's happening. Is it Lisa? I don't know, but the group is still trying. But I have to say, it's hard to say how I mean, it's so secretive. I have no idea what's going on with it. It's
Hmm.
hard to say how COVID has impacted this group because when I was in, it was very, very anti-internet, anti-cyber, but you know, it's still going on. Apparently, they're still trying to keep it going.
And also, what you said in your writing about how Chris had kind of been throwing these little seeds at you, and there were already things that you had considered but maybe hadn't let yourself run with, and then you do get in the car with him and go, and you said that every mile that you put between yourself and Boston was like, and that's not right, and that's not right, and this and this and this and this and this. So actually, yes, how has COVID affected this group? And if it means that you're not running around buying things for party supplies or holiday meals and things like that, maybe the distance and good night's sleep and time with family and friends in isolation has positively benefited people. And I really, really do hope that that's the case.
I hope
But
so. I
I
really
am aware that we're running out of time, so I'm just going to quickly summarize some of these points before we
okay.
move on to the last few questions.
Okay.
Despite Sharon passing away recently, you mentioned in your book that even though Keith Raniere has been sentenced to 120 years in prison, he still has a lot of faithful followers, and I'm sure that that is the same for Sharon as well.
Mm-hmm.
And even though your memoir is completed and Spencer's is being published later on in the year, there are still people that support school, and school is still an ongoing thing. But what was really impactful about your book, as you said, it's in 3 stages. So you've got the kind of recruitment stage, the rebellion stage, and then the life afterwards and the aftermath stage. I did really like the chapter where you summarized in like a fairy tale metaphor, like kids story metaphor, like novella style. So chapter 1, chapter 2, that I really did like that part,
I do
and
enjoy
maybe that should be the blurb for the book. The conclusion of your book talks about red flags and green flags in leadership, and things that you should avoid and things that you should look out for from positive leadership.
that. Mm-hmm.
Things like and things that you can do for yourself, like take charge of guilt. Take 10 minutes to feel guilt, even if it's uncomfortable. And if you still feel guilt after those 10 minutes, then maybe you can act on it, but don't impulsively act on guilt. And that might look like offering an extra hour on a Thursday night to the group because they have extra party planning to do. If you feel guilty for saying no, wait 10 minutes. And if you still feel guilty, then ask if they would like your help, or say, actually, I can help you. But if you don't feel guilty after those 10 minutes, like you might do if you have an argument with your spouse or a loved one or a family member or a friend, then maybe there's no reconciliation that needs to happen. So I really, really liked that part of the book that talked about red flags and green flags, and things like rejecting hijacking, and making sure that you surround yourself with people that make you feel empowered and motivated and positive. But when you finally decided to leave the group and Chris came to you with the evidence and you read it and you were like, oh my goodness, what is this? You
Mm-hmm.
actually ended up in a legal battle. And this is
Oh,
a consequence of
yeah.
speaking out that I feel a lot of people might be worried about. So what did this legal battle look like?
Um. Oh boy, it was so very, very convoluted. The legal battle. I think this is actually really important to talk about because I was extremely lucky. Most people get reamed out legally by cults, right? Um, my blog went up in 2012, and the Boston branch never ever, as far as I know, knew they didn't come after me. I'm pretty sure that somebody was reading it, but at that point, I really didn't care because part of my recovery was like, I'm not keeping your fucking secrets. They're not my problem, you know? They didn't come after me legally. And I thought, you know what? It's going to be really hard to come after me legally because they're so secretive. Like, who's the plaintiff going to be? Robert? I mean, so I felt pretty protected.
Esther versus Anonymous.
Right. And what are they going to come after me for? I'm telling my story. I'm exercising my free speech in the United States of America, right? This is so hard to explain because it was so convoluted. They were suing another ex-member who had a website and blog. They were hammering this person. It was fucking awful what they did to her. And they tried to rope me into that by accusing me. Like, somebody had posted a comment on my blog, and it's a blog, it was anonymous, I did not know who this person was, right? But I got legal papers from New York, right? No jurisdiction,
which is absolutely terrifying.
Yeah. Subpoenaing, is that how you say it? Information from me about this person who they were also suing, claiming that, of course, I know who this person is.
So they subpoena you and you say, I have no idea.
Right. And the shitty thing, really, Casey, is that, again, I got extraordinarily lucky. I have a friend. He's a lawyer. I went to my friend and I said, Mark, I have a crazy story to tell you. And I told him what was going on, and he helped me monitor the back and forth. You can kind of monitor these things online. And when he saw that, he helped me craft a letter to say, look, I live in Boston. I don't know who this person is. He used the legal language, blah, blah, blah. And the judge still wanted me to go to New York and come to some hearing. And so I was like, are you shitting me? You have no jurisdiction over me. The plaintiff, I don't know who she is. Like, she's a complete stranger. If this person, Minerva Taylor, walked by me in the street, I wouldn't know who she was. So, I was so angry that
I bet that would have been an interesting conversation. We need you to file these papers in your name and go to court against this person.
Yeah. How did that happen? Right? This
I'd love to know.
Has we live in different states. We've never met. And she's accusing me of withholding some information for her meritorious lawsuit against someone else, right? It was really, really batshit. But this is not uncommon with cults, right? And the only reason it didn't become a shit show, that I didn't get hammered the way my friend got hammered, is my friend Mark worked his legal network and found me pro bono counsel from an enormous global firm. And I had the bigger bully on my side. I had this fantastic lawyer who just, nipped it in the bud. In 3 or 4
that's
months.
Terrifying though, isn't it? A lot of people want to come out and tell their stories, and so they should, because so much abuse goes uncovered or so much abuse goes covered up or unreported or misrepresented, and a lot of these movements. We didn't even talk about your brush with Scientology, which you had. So people will have to read the book to find out more about Esther's other cult brushes. Yes, with Scientology, and how Robert was very quick to say, well, that's a cult, which I thought was interesting. They keep their tax exempt status. They get given thousands and thousands and thousands until it turns into millions and then billions of dollars. And people can't come forward and talk about these experiences because they just get taken to court for things like defamation. There's a group that I want to talk about that offers group workshops that I can't say legally because they are so litigious, and they will just if I even mention their name on one of these episodes, will just be so quick to take action. And Yanya Lalich actually came forward and said to me, they did it to me because I named them in one of my books. So you need to be very, very careful about how you talk about certain groups on the podcast. So sometimes I email her like, what about this group? How should I talk about this group? And so she's fantastic. She's like my guru, intentionally, unintentionally trying to sound culty, I suppose.
I want to make one more point about the legal thing. So not only are these groups abusing their members, they're abusing the court system. And, judges like the one that's like, oh, just come to New York, are enabling this. Just come to New York and so you can say, like, I don't know who the fuck you're talking about.
The financial and psychological implications that come with being served with legal documents, I again cannot comprehend what it would feel like to be served with actual documents where you think, oh my goodness, I'm being summoned to court, this is going to cost me so much money, I don't have any money, I don't have any support networks, there's nobody that will come to my side and speak out and corroborate my experiences and my story and say she's telling the truth. What am I supposed to do? What am I going to do?
It was awful.
And that's why I think it's so commendable and brave that people come forward and talk on this show, because being summoned to court or being served legal papers is definitely a ramification or consequence that might come from speaking publicly about some of these groups.
For sure.
But we are out of time, so I just wanted to summarize that your book that you have given me the opportunity to read was so insightful, so impactful in the way that you used your experiences and backed them up with the other testimonies of survivors from other groups, how you referenced cultic studies, resources and professionals that have been in the field for decades, that have done so much work around undue influence and coercion, and how you coined the term yourself, gentle souls. And that spoke to me. I even emailed you to say, oh my goodness, maybe I have a gentle soul. And I feel like you've really seen me. And now I kind of feel a little bit attacked by what you've written in your book, because I don't know if I want to be seen. And for people to understand exactly what I'm saying, they will have to read some of Esther's work. So the manuscript is finished, but it's not in print yet. And as soon as there is an update on the journey of Esther's memoir, I will let you know. But The Gentle Souls Revolution, a secret cult, an open rebellion, and life lessons about protecting and honoring your gentle soul was such an informative read for me. And I feel so privileged and honored to have had so much time to read your book, Esther, ahead of other people, and to have had you here on the show today to talk me through your experiences around esoteric cult and the trauma that they inflict on others, and how it expands and relates to everyday situations, other cult-like groups, and how you were able to start your blog and to rally other survivors together, and how you're still making an impact on those survivors' lives every single day. And we didn't cover as much as I wanted to, because I just babble on too much. But thank you so much for your time, Esther. And I really, really hope that you enjoyed the rest of your day.
You know what? Let me just also thank you. Thank you, one, for having me, two, for doing this work. It's incredibly important, especially right now. And Casey, I love the way you're bringing in the other interviews and books that you've read and people that you've had on, because for me, the most important thing to say is, and Margaret Singer, if she was alive, she would argue with me on this, but I think these groups are all the same. They all use the same tactics.
And when you see John, just tell him that I'm really interested in talking about his mutiny. Okay. And I hope that he listens back to this interview and he feels passionate about speaking out as well. And I really hope that your work continues to inspire and help other survivors. So please enjoy the rest of your day with other survivors of school and Sharon's twisted manipulation of everybody. And I will speak to you soon, Esther. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Casey. Take care.
Take care. Bye. This is the end of part 2. That is the end of this week's episode. If you'd like to get in touch, you can find me at cultvaultpodcast@gmail.com or follow me on Twitter and Instagram at cultvaultpod. I'm your speaker, Casey, and this has been the Cult Vault.